Let me tell you what happens if you don't change your mornings. 20 years from now, you'll be more successful, maybe wealthier, definitely busier, and you'll feel like a stranger in your own skin. You'll have authority over others, but no authority over your own mind. You'll be respected everywhere except in the mirror. I've watched this happen to brilliant people. They win every external battle and lose the only war that matters. The morning practice I'm sharing isn't about productivity or achievement. It's about making sure that when you finally arrive at your life, you're still the person who lives there. I know that sounds dramatic, maybe even a little frightening. But I've lived long enough to see this pattern repeat itself in hundreds of lives. And I need you to understand what's actually at stake here. Because it's not just about having a good morning routine. It's about whether the person you're becoming is someone you'll actually want to be. See, most people think success is the hard part. They think if they can just work hard enough, be disciplined enough, sacrifice enough, they'll finally arrive at the life they want. And maybe they're right. Maybe you will achieve everything you're working towards. Maybe you'll get the career, the recognition, the security, all of it. But here's what nobody tells you about that arrival. When you get there, you have to live with the person who got you there. And if you spend 20 years training yourself to ignore your own feelings, to override your body's signals, to perform instead of being present, to achieve instead of actually living, then the person waiting for you at the finish line is a stranger, a successful stranger, a respected stranger, but a stranger nonetheless. I've seen it in the eyes of people who finally got everything they wanted. There's this look. It's hard to describe, but once you've seen it, you recognize it everywhere. It's the look of someone who won the game but lost themselves in the playing. They'll sit across from me and they'll list all their accomplishments, and their voice will be hollow, empty, like they're reading someone else's resume. And then they'll say something like, "I should be happy. I have everything I worked for. Why do I feel so disconnected from my own life?" And that question, that specific question, is what I want to help you avoid. Because the answer is always the same. They feel disconnected because they built their entire life on disconnection. Every morning, they disconnected from how they actually felt in order to do what they thought they should do. They disconnected from their body's tiredness to push through one more task. They disconnected from their doubt to project confidence. They disconnected from their values to make the pragmatic choice, day after day, year after year, until disconnection became their default state. And here's the thing about disconnection. It's efficient in the short term. When you're not paying attention to your feelings, you can work longer hours. When you're not questioning your choices, you can move faster. When you're not present to your life, you can optimize it like a machine. So the world rewards you for it. Your boss promotes you. Your bank account grows. People respect your discipline. And you start to believe that this is what success looks like. This perpetual state of being slightly removed from yourself, watching your life happen instead of living it. But eventually, and it always happens eventually, you wake up one morning and realize you don't know who you are anymore. The person in the mirror looks familiar, but when you try to connect with what's behind those eyes, there's just static, noise, 1,000 borrowed opinions and learned behaviors and strategic presentations, but no core, no center, no you. That's the future I'm trying to help you avoid. Not because I'm being pessimistic or dramatic, but because I care about you too much to let you walk into it blindly. I've watched too many people arrive at success only to discover they left themselves behind somewhere in the journey. And the tragedy is, It didn't have to be that way. The disconnection wasn't necessary. It was just the path they were taught to follow. So what I want to share with you today is a different path, not an easier path. I won't lie to you and say this is some simple life hack that fixes everything, but a more honest path. A path that doesn't require you to abandon yourself in order to succeed. A path where you can build a life and still be present for the building. A path where authority over others flows naturally from authority over yourself. And that path starts in the morning. Not because mornings are magical or sacred, but because the morning is the only time you get to meet yourself before the world starts making demands. It's the only space where you can be honest about who you actually are before you have to perform who you're supposed to be. And what you do in that space, how you show up for yourself when nobody's watching, that determines everything that follows. Now, you've been lied to about what creates inner authority. And I need to be direct about this because the lie is so pervasive, so embedded in our culture, that you probably don't even recognize it as a lie anymore. You probably think it's just common sense. The lie is this: authority comes from confidence, from having all the answers, from being unshakable, certain, always in control. So you try to become someone who never doubts, never breaks, never feels small. You wake up every morning and you put on your armor, your professional mask, your confident voice, your strategic smile, and you walk through your day pretending you know exactly what you're doing, pretending you're not scared, pretending you have it all figured out. And the harder you try to maintain this performance, the more fraudulent you feel. Because deep down, you know you're not actually that certain. You know you're making half your decisions based on guesswork and fear. You know you're one major crisis away from falling apart. But you can't let anyone see that, so you perform harder. You build a self on top of a self, and then another self on top of that, until you've got so many layers of performance that you've completely lost touch with the foundation. And the foundation keeps shifting because it's built on fear, on the terror of being exposed as someone who doesn't have it all together, on the anxiety that if people saw the real you, the confused, uncertain, sometimes overwhelmed real you, they'd lose respect for you. They'd see you as weak, incompetent, unworthy of authority. So you spend your energy managing your image instead of living your life. You're exhausted not from the work itself, but from the constant performance of someone who isn't exhausted by the work. You're stressed not from the challenges you face, but from pretending you're not stressed by the challenges. You're fractured, performing strength in public while crumbling in private. And you think this is just what it takes to be successful. This is the price of authority. But what if I told you that's backwards? What if the performance itself is what's undermining your authority? What if real authority, the kind that can't be shaken by external circumstances, the kind that people recognize and respect at a level deeper than conscious thought? What if that kind of authority comes from the exact opposite of performance? This is the insight that changed everything for me, and it's the insight I want to share with you today. Authority doesn't come from certainty. It comes from being so honest with your uncertainty that no external crisis can surprise you. Let me say that again because it's important. Authority doesn't come from pretending you have it all figured out. It comes from being so intimately familiar with your not having it figured out that you can't be destabilized by it. When you've already seen your doubt, named it, sat with it, made peace with it, when you've done this every single morning for years, then doubt can't ambush you. It can't catch you off guard and make you panic. It's just an old friend visiting, and you know how to be with it without letting it run your life. This is what the morning practice I'm going to teach you actually does. It doesn't make you more confident or more certain or more in control. It makes you more honest. And honesty, real, unflinching honesty with yourself, is the foundation of unshakable authority. Think about the people in your life who have real presence. I'm not talking about the loud people or the dominating people or the people who demand attention. I'm talking about the people who walk into a room and somehow shift the energy without trying. The people you trust instinctively, even if you can't articulate why. The people who can remain calm in a crisis, not because they have all the answers, but because they're not panicking about not having all the answers. What those people have in common isn't confidence, it's congruence. They're the same person in private that they are in public. They're not performing a version of themselves. They're not hiding their uncertainty or pretending to be more capable than they are. They're just real, present, honest. And that honesty creates a solidity that performance can never achieve. Because here's what performance does. It fragments you. Every time you pretend to feel something you don't feel, every time you hide what's actually happening inside you, every time you choose strategy over truth, you create a split, a little gap between who you are and who you're presenting. And that gap requires energy to maintain. It requires constant vigilance. You have to remember what you're supposed to be projecting. Monitor whether people are believing it. Adjust your performance based on their reactions. It's exhausting. But when you're honest, when you've stopped performing, there's no gap to maintain. You can put all your energy toward actually dealing with life instead of managing how life perceives you. And that shift, that reclamation of energy, that integration of your fragmented selves, that's what creates real authority. This is what I discovered in my own life, and it's what I've taught to thousands of students over the decades. The morning practice that I'm about to share with you isn't about becoming a better version of yourself. It's not about self-improvement or optimization or discipline. It's about self-recognition. It's about meeting yourself, the actual you, not the performed you, every single day until you become so familiar with who you actually are beneath all the roles that you can't be manipulated by the world's demands anymore. And let me be clear about what I mean by manipulation. I'm not talking about some external villain trying to control you. I'm talking about the way the world's expectations, your own ambitions, your internalized beliefs about who you should be, how all of that shapes your behavior without you even realizing it. How you wake up in the morning and immediately start being who you think you're supposed to be, without ever checking in with who you actually are. That's the manipulation I'm talking about. The subtle, constant pressure to perform a self that fits other people's definitions of success, competence, worthiness. And the reason this manipulation works so well is because you're not familiar enough with your actual self to notice when you're betraying it. You don't have a baseline of what your authentic feeling state is, so you can't recognize when you've drifted away from it. The morning practice creates that baseline. It gives you a daily encounter with yourself before the performance begins. And over time, that encounter builds a kind of internal knowing that becomes your compass. When you're drifting into performance, you feel it. When you're making a choice that contradicts your values, you notice it. When you're hiding from yourself, you catch it earlier. This is the core pain I want to address in this video. You feel fractured. You feel like you're living multiple lives. The one you present to the world, the one you hide in private, the one you dream about but never act on. You're exhausted from managing all these versions of yourself, and you think the solution is to become better at the performance, more disciplined, more controlled, more put together. But the actual solution is to stop performing altogether, to become so honest with yourself about what you're actually experiencing. The doubt, the fear, the confusion, the messiness, that you no longer need to hide it. Not because you've fixed it or overcome it, but because you've accepted that this is just part of being human. This is what it actually feels like to be alive. And when you stop treating your humanity as a problem that needs to be solved, the exhaustion lifts, the fragmentation heals, and what's left is an effortless authority that doesn't need to prove itself because it's not based on performance. So here's what I'm promising you in this video. By the end, you won't have a new routine to follow. You won't have a set of steps that magically transform you into someone more confident or successful or put together. What you'll have is permission. Permission to stop performing. Permission to be human. Permission to show up to your life as you actually are, instead of who you think you should be. And along with that permission, I'm going to give you a simple practice that lets you meet yourself before the day demands you become someone else. A practice that builds familiarity with your actual internal experience. A practice that creates the foundation for real authority. Not authority over others, but authority over your own reactivity, your own patterns, your own tendency to abandon yourself when things get hard. This perspective stands apart from everything else you've heard about morning routines, because it's not about optimization. It's not about productivity or achievement or becoming your best self. It's about becoming your real self. And real selves have natural authority because they're not hiding, not pretending, not managing an image. They're just present, honest, congruent. The unique insight I want to offer you is this. Peace is not the absence of chaos. Peace is what happens when you stop pretending you're not in chaos. The moment you stop lying to yourself about what you're feeling, the performance anxiety disappears. And what's left is a kind of okayness with life as it actually is, not as you wish it were. And that okayness, that radical acceptance of reality, is the most powerful foundation you can build your life on. Because when you're okay with things not being okay, you become unbreakable. Not in the sense that nothing can hurt you, but in the sense that hurt can't destroy you. You can feel pain without collapsing into despair. You can face uncertainty without needing to control it. You can sit with your own inadequacy without it meaning you're worthless. And from that place of being okay with not being okay, you can actually engage with life honestly. You can make choices based on what you actually want, not what you think you should want. You can pursue goals that actually matter to you, not goals that look impressive to others. You can build relationships based on genuine connection, not strategic networking. You can live. This is the transformation I'm offering you. Not a better performance, but the end of performance. Not more control, but the freedom that comes from releasing the need for control. Not inner peace as a permanent state, but inner peace as a relationship with all your states. The peaceful ones and the chaotic ones. The confident moments and the doubtful ones, the clarity and the confusion. And it all starts with what you do in the morning, with whether you meet yourself honestly or whether you immediately start performing, with whether you give yourself permission to be exactly as you are in that moment, or whether you force yourself to be who you think you should be. So let me tell you a story about what this actually looks like in practice. Let me show you what happens when someone learns to meet themselves honestly, and what happens when they don't. There was a young man in my village. I remember him clearly even now, decades later, because he embodied something I see in so many people. He was brilliant. His mind moved faster than almost anyone I'd ever met. He could grasp complex philosophical concepts instantly. make connections that took others weeks to see, articulate ideas with a precision that was honestly breathtaking. When he spoke about the classics, about virtue and governance and the proper ordering of society, people listened. He had a natural charisma, a presence that drew others to him. But his body told a different story entirely. His hands never stopped moving. He would fidget with his sleeves, tap his fingers against his leg, adjust his robe over and over. When he sat, he couldn't sit still. He would shift his weight, cross and uncross his legs, lean forward and back like he was trying to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. When he spoke, even when he was saying something profound, his eyes would dart around the room, to the door, to the window, back to me, to the floor, like he was tracking invisible threats that only he could see. I watched him during group discussions with other students. He would ask these brilliant, penetrating questions about the nature of virtue and the cultivation of character. But the moment he finished speaking, before anyone could answer, his attention was already elsewhere, looking over his shoulder, checking the door, some restless energy pulling him away from the present moment even as he tried to engage with it. One morning, he arrived at my door before sunrise. I was already awake, sitting in the courtyard, just being with the early stillness. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his robe hastily arranged, and his whole body was vibrating with that familiar restless energy, but intensified, more desperate. "Teacher," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I need to talk to you. I've been practicing meditation for 3 years now, every morning, just like you taught us. I sit, I focus on my breath, I try to clear my mind of distracting thoughts. I follow all the instructions perfectly, but the moment I finish, the moment I stand up and start my day, the chaos returns. Actually, it's worse than before I started. I'm more anxious now than I was 3 years ago. The meditation isn't working. What am I doing wrong?" I looked at him for a long moment. At the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. And I felt this wave of compassion because I could see exactly what was happening. He had turned meditation into another performance, another thing he needed to succeed at, another arena where he could either do it right or do it wrong, and he was failing at it, which meant he was failing at inner peace, which meant he was fundamentally broken. I asked him to sit beside me, not to meditate, I told him, not to breathe consciously or clear his mind or achieve any particular state. Just sit, just be here with me in this courtyard as the sun comes up. He sat down, and I could feel the effort it took him, the effort of just sitting without trying to accomplish anything. Within 30 seconds, he was squirming. His hand went to his sleeve, started fidgeting with the fabric. His weight shifted from one side to the other. His breathing got faster, shallower. "I feel like I'm wasting time," he said quietly, almost ashamed. "Just sitting here doing nothing. I should be practicing. I should be working on clearing my mind. I should be—" "Stop," I said gently. "Listen to what you just said. Should. Who told you that you should be doing anything right now?" He looked confused. "But that's why I came to you, to learn how to achieve inner peace, to cultivate stillness, to master my mind." "And how's that working for you?" I asked. "All this achieving and cultivating and mastering?" His face crumpled, and for just a moment, I saw past the brilliant student, past the charismatic speaker, past all the performance, and I saw a terrified young man who believed that he was fundamentally broken and that if he could just try hard enough, discipline himself enough, master the right techniques, Maybe he could fix himself. It's not working, he whispered. Nothing's working. I'm more anxious than ever. I can't sleep. I can't sit still. I can't stop my mind from racing. And I don't understand why. I'm doing everything right. I'm following all the practices. Why am I still like this? And that word, still, that's what broke my heart. Still like this. As if who he was wrong. As if his anxiety was a personal failing. As if his restless mind was evidence of some fundamental inadequacy. You're not doing anything wrong, I told him. You're not broken. You're not failing at meditation. What you're actually experiencing is the natural result of treating yourself as a problem that needs to be solved. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, so I explained it to him. Every morning, you sit down to meditate. But you're not actually meditating. You're evaluating yourself. You're monitoring whether your mind is getting quieter, whether you're achieving stillness, whether you're doing it right. And every time a thought arises, which is what thoughts do, they arise, you interpret it as evidence of failure, evidence that you're not good enough at this yet. So you try harder. You force yourself to focus more intensely on your breath. You fight with your thoughts. You white-knuckle your way through 20 minutes of internal warfare. And then you stand up and wonder why you feel more anxious than when you started. He was nodding slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. But here's what you don't understand, I continued. You're not anxious because you're bad at meditation. You're anxious because meditation has become another performance. Another thing you can fail at. Another arena where you have to prove your worth. You're treating your current state, your anxiety, your restless mind as wrong, as something that needs to be fixed. And then you're using meditation as a tool to fix it, which means every moment you spend meditating, you're reinforcing the belief that who you are right now is not okay, that you need to become someone else, someone calmer, more peaceful, more spiritual, before you're acceptable. But isn't that the point? He asked. Isn't meditation supposed to make us calmer, more peaceful? No, I said firmly. That's what everyone gets wrong. Meditation isn't about becoming peaceful. It's about becoming honest, about seeing yourself clearly without judgment, about being willing to sit with exactly what is, instead of constantly trying to make it into what you think it should be. I watched him process this, watched the resistance rise in his eyes, then the confusion, then something that might have been hope. What I'm about to teach you, I said, isn't about achieving peace. It's about becoming honest about your lack of peace. And paradoxically, and this is the part that sounds impossible until you experience it, honesty creates what effort cannot. Let me pause here and talk to you directly about what was actually happening with this young man, because his story is your story. Maybe the details are different. Maybe you're not anxious in the same way he was. Or maybe your restlessness manifests differently. But the core pattern is the same. You've been taught to treat yourself as a project, as something that needs to be improved, optimized, fixed. You wake up in the morning and immediately start evaluating yourself. Are you productive enough, disciplined enough, successful enough? Are you meditating correctly? Eating right? Working hard? Being a good person? And every evaluation, even the positive ones, reinforces this fundamental belief that who you are right now, in this moment, isn't quite enough. That you need to become someone else, someone better, more together, more evolved, before you're acceptable. And this belief is poison, not because it's mean or judgmental, but because it's dishonest. It requires you to constantly deny reality, to pretend that what you're feeling isn't what you're actually feeling, to override your body's signals in service of some imagined ideal self, to live in the future where you'll finally be good enough instead of the present where you actually exist. The morning practice I taught that young man, and the practice I'm going to teach you, is the antidote to this poison. It's a practice of radical honesty, of meeting yourself exactly as you are in each moment, without the filter of should, without the agenda of improvement, without the performance of being who you think you're supposed to be. And what happens when you do this? When you stop treating yourself as a problem to be solved and start treating yourself as a reality to be witnessed? Let me tell you what happened with that young man. I had him come back the next morning, same time before sunrise. This time, I gave him different instructions. When you sit down, I said, I don't want you to meditate. I don't want you to focus on your breath or clear your mind or achieve any particular state. I want you to simply notice what's actually happening inside you. And I want you to name it out loud. No judgment, no trying to change it, just honest reporting. So he sat down, and within seconds I could see the familiar patterns starting. The fidgeting, the restless shifting, the rapid breathing. But this time, instead of trying to suppress it or fix it or meditate his way through it, I had him speak it. I feel anxious, he said. Good, I replied. What else? My chest feels tight, like there's a weight on it. Keep going. My mind is racing. I'm thinking about everything I need to do today. I'm worried I'm doing this wrong. I'm frustrated that I'm anxious again. He paused, took a shaky breath. I'm so tired of feeling like this. I just wanted to stop. And there it was, the truth beneath all the performance. He wasn't anxious because he was broken. He was anxious because he was exhausted from trying not to be anxious. He was in pain because he was fighting with his pain, trying to force it away, treating it as an enemy instead of information. Now, I said gently, I want you to try something that's going to feel strange. I want you to just let it be here. The anxiety, the tight chest, the racing thoughts, the frustration, the tiredness, all of it. Don't try to fix it or change it or make it go away. Just let it exist, like you're making room for an uncomfortable guest. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But won't that make it worse, if I just let it be here? Try it and see, I said. So he did. He sat there, and instead of fighting with his anxiety, instead of trying to breathe it away or meditate past it, he just allowed it, and I watched something incredible happen. The fidgeting didn't stop immediately, but it changed quality. It became less frantic, less desperate. His breathing was still fast, but it found a rhythm. His eyes were still moving, but they softened slightly, and after about 5 minutes of this, just sitting with what was actually there instead of fighting with it, he looked at me with this expression of wonder. It's still here, he said. The anxiety is still here, but I feel different, less scared of it. It's like, he struggled to find words. It's like it's just a feeling instead of a crisis. Yes, I said. That's exactly it. When you stop treating difficult feelings as emergencies, they lose their power to destabilize you. They're still uncomfortable. But uncomfortable isn't the same as unbearable. You can sit with uncomfortable. You've been sitting with uncomfortable your whole life. What you can't sit with is the story that feeling uncomfortable means something's wrong with you. Over the following weeks, I taught him to start every morning this way, not with meditation, but with honest recognition, sitting down and simply naming what was actually present. Some mornings it was anxiety. Some mornings it was sadness. Some mornings it was numbness or confusion or restless energy. Whatever it was, the practice was the same. Name it, allow it, sit with it without trying to change it. And something remarkable happened. He didn't become less anxious, at least not in any linear way. Some mornings he was still incredibly anxious, but his relationship with the anxiety transformed completely. He stopped seeing it as evidence of personal failure, stopped treating it as an enemy to be defeated, started recognizing it as information about what he was carrying, what he was avoiding, what he needed to pay attention to. And as his relationship with his anxiety changed, so did his presence. That desperate, restless energy started to settle. Not because he was suppressing it, but because he wasn't fighting with it anymore. He could sit in a conversation and actually be present instead of monitoring himself for signs of anxiety. He could ask a question and wait for the answer instead of already moving on to the next thought. He could be still, not because he'd mastered stillness, but because he'd stopped being at war with his restlessness. People started noticing. Other students would comment that he seemed different, more grounded, more trustworthy. And the fascinating thing was, he was actually more honest about his struggles now. He would openly admit when he didn't know something, when he felt uncertain, when he was anxious about a situation. But instead of that honesty making him seem weak, it made him seem more solid, more real. People trusted him more because he wasn't pretending anymore. That's what I mean when I say honesty creates authority. Not the honesty of confessing your sins or dumping your problems on others, but the honesty of being congruent, of your internal experience matching your external presentation, of not having to maintain a performance because you've stopped treating your humanity as something that needs to be hidden. This young man's transformation is the transformation I want for you. Not a transformation where you become someone different, but a transformation where you become more yourself, where you drop the performance and discover that the real you, messy, uncertain, sometimes anxious, sometimes confused, is actually enough, actually worthy, actually capable of authority and presence and impact. But to get there, you have to be willing to meet yourself honestly, every morning. Before the world starts making demands, before you put on your professional mask and your strategic smile and your confident voice, you have to be willing to sit with whoever shows up in that moment, the tired version of you, the anxious version, the confused version, the sad version, and treat them like they're worth knowing, worth being with, worth accepting. Now let me share another story with you, a different kind of story, more metaphorical, but equally important to understanding this practice. Imagine you're standing next to a stream and you're holding a jar. You dip the jar into the stream and pull it out, and the water inside the jar is muddy, clouded with sediment that was stirred up from the bottom. You can't see through it. It's murky and brown and completely opaque. Your first instinct, your trained instinct, is to do something about this, to fix it. So you shake the jar, thinking maybe you can separate the mud from the water through force. Or you stick your finger in and try to stir it in a specific pattern, hoping to somehow organize the chaos. Or you pour some of it out and add fresh water, trying to dilute the muddiness. You're taking action. You're solving the problem. You're being productive. But what actually clarifies muddy water? What actually separates the sediment from the liquid and lets you see clearly? Stillness, simply putting the jar down and leaving it alone. When you stop interfering, when you stop trying to force a solution, the sediment naturally settles to the bottom. Gravity does what effort cannot. Time does what action cannot. And what you're left with is clear water and settled mud, naturally separated, without any intervention required. Your mind works exactly the same way. Every single morning, You wake up with muddy water, thoughts from yesterday that haven't settled yet, worries about today that are already swirling, half-remembered dreams mixing with emerging anxieties, residue from every conversation, every decision, every moment of stress that you haven't fully processed. It's all there, churning around in your consciousness, making it impossible to see clearly. And what do most people do? They immediately start shaking the jar. They grab their phone and start scrolling, adding more sediment, more stimulus, more information to process. They jump into their to-do list, stirring up anxiety about everything they need to accomplish. They start planning and strategizing and trying to think their way to clarity. They're desperately trying to force the muddiness to resolve through effort. But what if clarity isn't something you create? What if it's something that naturally emerges when you stop disturbing it? This was the core of my morning practice, and it's the core of what I'm teaching you. I would wake up, and I would sit with the muddy water of my mind. I wouldn't try to meditate it away or analyze it or fix it. I would just observe it. Watch the thoughts swirl without grabbing onto them. Notice the worries arise without needing to solve them immediately. Feel the residual emotions from yesterday without judging them or pushing them away. Some mornings, the water cleared quickly. Within 10 minutes, I could feel the settling happening. The thoughts would slow down. The anxiety would soften. And there would be this moment of clarity where I could see to the bottom of myself, where I could access what I actually thought, what I actually felt, what actually mattered to me beneath all the noise. But other mornings, many mornings, the water stayed muddy for the entire hour. The thoughts kept swirling, the anxiety kept churning, and nothing seemed to settle at all. And this is the crucial part. That was okay too, because the practice wasn't about achieving clear water. The practice was about being willing to see the mud. Do you understand the difference? When you're trying to achieve clarity, muddy water becomes a failure, evidence that you're doing it wrong, that something's broken, that you need to try harder or use a different technique. But when you're simply witnessing what's there, muddy water is just information. It tells you that you're carrying a lot right now, that you haven't processed yesterday yet, that there's sediment in your system that needs time to settle. And here's what I discovered over years of this practice. When you stop treating muddy water as a problem, it settles faster. Not because you're doing anything to make it settle, but because you're not constantly re-stirring it with your anxiety about it being muddy. You're not adding the extra layer of, I shouldn't be feeling this way, on top of whatever you're already feeling. You're just letting it be what it is. And what it is usually temporary, usually self-resolving, usually just part of being human. This is what I mean when I talk about befriending your chaos instead of fighting with it. The muddy water isn't your enemy. It's not evidence of personal failure. It's just what happens when you're alive and engaged with life. When you have things you care about, people you love, work that matters, challenges you're facing. Of course, your mind is going to be stirred up sometimes. That's not dysfunction. That's being human. The dysfunction comes when you interpret the moodiness as a crisis, when you panic about your thoughts not being clear, when you judge yourself for feeling anxious or confused or overwhelmed, when you add layer upon layer of resistance and shame and should be different on top of your actual experience. That's when the water never clears. That's when you're stuck in permanent muddiness, not because your mind is inherently chaotic, but because you keep shaking the jar in your attempts to fix it. So every morning, I would sit with my muddy water, and I would practice the hardest skill I've ever learned, the skill of doing nothing, of not interfering, of trusting that if I simply created space and stopped disturbing the system, clarity would emerge on its own timeline. And you know what happened? Over months and years of this practice, I started to trust myself differently. Started to trust that I didn't need to force solutions, that I didn't need to have everything figured out immediately, that I could sit with confusion and uncertainty and not knowing, and that clarity would arrive when it arrived. And in the meantime, I could live my life. I could make decisions. I could take action. Even with muddy water, even without perfect clarity, I could still show up and do what needed to be done. And paradoxically, that trust, that willingness to act without perfect clarity, that's what created the authority people recognized in me. Not because I had all the answers, but because I wasn't panicking about not having all the answers. Not because I was always clear and certain, but because I was comfortable with being unclear and uncertain. I knew how to be with muddy water. I'd practiced it every morning for decades. So when life got muddy, and life always gets muddy, I didn't collapse. I just sat with it and waited for the settling. This is the shift I want to help you make, from trying to force clarity to trusting natural settling, from treating your internal chaos as a problem to witnessing it as information, from shaking the jar to simply putting it down and giving it time. And it starts in the morning, in that space before the day begins, before anyone needs anything from you, before you have to perform or produce or be anyone other than who you actually are. That's when you sit with your muddy water. That's when you practice the radical skill of doing nothing while being completely present. Now you might be wondering, how does watching mud settle create authority over your life? The connection isn't immediately obvious, but it's profound. So let me explain what's actually happening at a deeper level. When you can sit with muddy water without panicking, without needing to fix it, without judging yourself for it, you're developing what I call internal familiarity. You're learning the landscape of your own mind. You're discovering what your particular patterns are, how your anxiety manifests, what triggers your clarity and what disturbs it, which thoughts are signal and which are noise. You're becoming an expert in yourself. And that expertise, that deep familiarity with your internal terrain, that's what creates authority. Not authority over others, but authority over your own reactivity. Think about it this way. Most people are strangers to themselves. They don't know what they're going to think until they think it. They don't know how they're going to feel until they feel it. They don't know how they're going to react under pressure until the pressure arrives. So they're constantly being surprised by themselves, ambushed by their own emotions, derailed by their own thought patterns. Their internal life is unpredictable territory, and they're navigating it blind. But when you meet yourself every morning, when you sit with your muddy water day after day, observing how it behaves, noticing what settles quickly and what takes longer, recognizing your recurring patterns, you stop being surprised by yourself. You know this territory. You've mapped it. You've sat with it enough times to recognize the landmarks. So when anxiety shows up in the middle of your workday, it's not an ambush. It's a familiar visitor. You recognize it from this morning's muddy water. You know it's going to pass, because you've watched it pass 1,000 times. You don't panic. You don't start a secondary crisis about having anxiety. You just notice it, acknowledge it, and keep moving. The anxiety might still be uncomfortable, but it doesn't destabilize you, because you have authority over your relationship with it. Same with doubt. Same with insecurity. Same with confusion. When you've sat with these states every morning, when you've watched them arise and settle and arise again, they lose their power to throw you off course. They're just weather patterns moving through your internal landscape. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's stormy, but you're the landscape. The weather doesn't define you. This is what real authority looks like. Not the authority of never feeling doubt, but the authority of knowing how to be with doubt. Not the authority of always being clear, but the authority of being comfortable with muddiness. Not the authority of having everything under control, but the authority of being okay when things are out of control. And people feel this in you. They might not be able to articulate what's different, but they sense it. You don't collapse under pressure because pressure isn't a surprise to you. You've sat with internal pressure every morning. You don't get defensive when criticized because criticism isn't a threat to your self-knowledge. You've already seen your flaws in this morning's muddy water. You don't need to dominate or prove yourself because you're not defending a fragile image. You know who you are beneath the image. That's the authority that emerges from the morning practice. Not the loud authority of the person who needs everyone to know they're in charge, but the quiet authority of the person who's in charge of themselves, who knows their internal territory, who can be trusted to not fall apart when things get hard because they've practiced sitting with hard things every single day. Now, let me tell you about 3 core lessons that emerged from this practice over the decades. 3 fundamental truths that might contradict everything you've been taught, but that I've found to be absolutely essential to developing real inner authority. The first lesson is this: authority is internal familiarity, not external control. I need to be very clear about what I mean by this because the words authority and control are often used interchangeably, and that confusion is precisely what derails most people's attempts at building a meaningful life. When most people think about authority, they think about control, the ability to determine outcomes, to make things happen the way they want them to happen, to have power over their circumstances, their work, other people, their own behavior. And so they spend their energy trying to control things. They create elaborate systems and routines and strategies. They discipline themselves rigorously. They try to eliminate variables, minimize risk, force outcomes. And in some domains, this works. You can control whether you show up to work on time. You can control whether you complete a task. You can control certain behaviors and habits. But here's what you can't control: how you feel about showing up to work. Whether you actually want to complete the task or you're just forcing yourself through it. Whether your disciplined behavior is emerging from genuine alignment or from self-coercion. You can't control your emotions. You can't control your thoughts. You can't control whether doubt arises or anxiety shows up or insecurity whispers in your ear. You can suppress these things, override them, pretend they're not there, but you can't actually control them. And every attempt to control them fragments you further, creates more internal resistance, more exhaustion. Real authority doesn't come from controlling these things. It comes from being so familiar with them that they can't control you. Let me say that again, because it's crucial. When you're intimately familiar with your internal landscape, when you know your patterns, recognize your triggers, understand your cycles, those things lose their power to throw you off course. Not because you've eliminated them, but because you've befriended them. When anxiety shows up and you recognize it as the same anxiety that shows up every Monday morning when you're facing a challenging week, when you know from experience that it's going to spike around mid-morning and then settle by afternoon, when you understand that it's not actually about the work itself, but about your fear of disappointing people, that anxiety doesn't control you anymore. You can feel it fully, acknowledge it, let it move through you, and still show up to your work with presence and focus. The anxiety exists, but it's not running the show. That's internal familiarity creating authority. You're not controlling the anxiety. You're not even trying to. You're just so familiar with it that it can't ambush you, can't manipulate you, can't convince you that its presence means something catastrophic. Now contrast that with the person who's trying to control their anxiety. They wake up, notice anxiety, and immediately panic about it. I shouldn't be anxious. I meditated yesterday. I'm supposed to be past this. What's wrong with me? And now they've got anxiety about their anxiety. They spend the morning trying various techniques to make it go away: breathing exercises, positive affirmations, distraction, suppression. They're fighting with it, trying to force it out of their system. And maybe they succeed in pushing it down for a few hours, but it hasn't actually resolved. It's just been temporarily suppressed, and it will come back, usually stronger, because it hasn't been acknowledged or understood or allowed to complete its natural cycle. This person has no authority over their anxiety, even though they're desperately trying to control it. Because control without familiarity is just force, and force creates resistance. The more you fight with your internal experience, the more power it has over you. But when you spend every morning sitting with your internal experience, not fighting it, not fixing it, just witnessing it, you build familiarity. You learn the difference between the anxiety that's pointing to something real that needs your attention and the anxiety that's just old patterns firing. You learn which thoughts are worth engaging with and which ones are just mental noise. You learn what actually helps you settle and what just adds more agitation. And this familiarity gives you choices. When you recognize a pattern, you can choose whether to engage with it or let it pass. When you understand a trigger, you can choose to remove yourself from triggering situations or to consciously move through them, knowing what you're facing. When you know your cycles, you can plan your life accordingly instead of fighting against your natural rhythms. This is authority, not the authority of I can make myself feel however I want to feel, but the authority of I know myself well enough to navigate whatever I'm feeling. The first is an illusion that creates constant failure. The second is a reality that creates genuine power, and it extends far beyond just emotions. When you're familiar with your thought patterns, you recognize when you're catastrophizing versus when you're genuinely assessing risk. When you know your decision-making process, you can tell when you're making a choice from fear versus from clarity. When you understand your relationship patterns, you can catch yourself falling into old dynamics before they fully take hold. This self-knowledge, this internal familiarity, it makes you unmovable in a very specific way. Not unmovable in the sense that nothing affects you, but unmovable in the sense that you know your ground, you know where you're standing. So when external pressure comes, and it always comes, you don't get swept away by it because you're rooted in self-knowledge. I've watched people with immense external power, rulers, wealthy merchants, influential scholars, completely fall apart when their circumstances changed. Their authority was based on their position, their wealth, their status. When those external structures shifted, they had nothing to stand on. They didn't know who they were without those markers of success. They'd never bothered to develop internal familiarity because external control felt like enough. But I've also watched people with no external power whatsoever. Peasants, servants, people society deemed insignificant, remain completely centered through devastating loss and upheaval, because their authority wasn't based on circumstances. It was based on knowing themselves so intimately that no external crisis could make them strangers to themselves. That's the authority the morning practice builds. Every day you sit with your muddy water. Every day you witness what's actually present in you without trying to change it. You're building familiarity. You're creating an internal map. You're developing a relationship with yourself that becomes more important than any external relationship or circumstance. And here's the beautiful part. When you stop trying to control yourself and start focusing on knowing yourself, you often end up with more actual control than you had before. Not because you're forcing anything, but because your actions are now aligned with who you actually are, instead of who you think you should be. You're not fighting yourself anymore, so all that energy that was going into internal warfare can now go into actually living your life. The second core lesson is closely related, but even more challenging to accept. Peace is not a feeling. It's a relationship with all feelings. This might be the most important thing I ever learned, and it took me decades to fully understand it. So please listen carefully. You think enlightened people, wise people, peaceful people. You think they walk around feeling calm and serene all the time. You think they've achieved some permanent state of tranquility where difficult emotions don't touch them anymore. And so you're trying to get there. You're trying to meditate your way to perpetual calmness. You're trying to think your way out of anxiety. You're trying to discipline yourself into serenity. But that's not what peace is. That's not what wisdom is. That's not what any of this is about. Real peace, the kind that can't be shaken by circumstances, isn't a feeling. It's a relationship. Specifically, it's a relationship with all of your feelings that allows each one to exist without making it mean something catastrophic about you. Let me put it more simply. A peaceful person isn't someone who never feels anxious. It's someone who can feel anxious without believing they're broken. A wise person isn't someone who never feels doubt. It's someone who can feel doubt without needing to pretend they're certain. An enlightened person isn't someone who's transcended human emotion. It's someone who can experience the full spectrum of human emotion without getting lost in stories about what those emotions mean. This is a radical shift in understanding, and it changes everything about how you approach your inner life. When you think peace is a feeling, a specific emotional state you're trying to achieve, then every moment you're not feeling peaceful becomes a failure. You're anxious. Failure. You're sad. Failure. You're angry. Failure. You're confused. Failure. And so you spend your entire life fighting with your emotional reality, trying to force it into this narrow band of acceptable feelings. But when you understand that peace is a relationship, a way of being with whatever arises, then there's no such thing as a failed emotional state. You can be anxious and peaceful simultaneously. Not peaceful in the sense of feeling calm, but peaceful in the sense of being okay with feeling anxious. Not resisting it, not judging it, not making it mean you're somehow less than or broken or failing at life. The practice I did every morning was building this relationship. I would sit with whatever emotional state was present: anxiety, sadness, frustration, joy, numbness, confusion, and I would practice being okay with it. Not happy about it necessarily, not trying to make it last if it was pleasant, or make it leave if it was unpleasant. Just okay with it being here right now. And what I discovered is that okayness with emotional reality is more valuable than any specific emotional state could ever be. Because emotional states are constantly changing. You're going to feel anxious sometimes. You're going to feel sad sometimes. You're going to feel overwhelmed and confused and angry and 1,000 other things across the course of your life. That's just what it means to be alive. But if you can be okay with feeling those things, if you can let them exist without adding a layer of resistance or shame or panic. They move through you much more cleanly. They come, they deliver whatever information or energy they're carrying, and they go, like weather patterns, passing through. It's only when you resist them that they get stuck. When you feel anxious and then judge yourself for feeling anxious, the anxiety intensifies. When you feel sad and tell yourself you shouldn't be sad, the sadness deepens into something heavier. When you feel angry and suppress it because anger is bad, it goes underground and comes out sideways. But when you can simply feel anxious and say, "Oh, anxiety is here. I know you. I've sat with you before. You're uncomfortable, but you're not dangerous. You're just a feeling moving through. I can be with this." When you can do that, the anxiety completes its cycle and moves on. This is what I mean when I say peace is a relationship with all feelings. It's not about achieving some permanent state of calmness. It's about developing the capacity to be with whatever state arises without falling apart, without making it mean something terrible about you, without needing to immediately fix it or change it or get rid of it. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to control your emotions, they become less controlling. When you stop treating difficult emotions as emergencies, they lose their emergency quality. When you stop believing that feeling bad means something is wrong with you, feeling bad becomes just feeling bad. Unpleasant, but not catastrophic. Uncomfortable, but not unbearable. I've sat with profound grief and remained at peace. Not because I wasn't deeply sad, I was, but because I knew how to be with deep sadness without adding a story about how I shouldn't be feeling this way, or how this sadness means I'm broken, or how I need to fix it immediately. The sadness was there, fully felt, fully honored, and I was at peace with its presence. I've sat with intense fear and remained at peace. Not because the fear wasn't real, it was, but because I recognized it as fear, understood what it was pointing to, and didn't need to either act on it impulsively or suppress it entirely. The fear was information, and I was at peace with receiving that information. This is what the morning practice taught me. Every day, I would sit with my emotional reality without trying to curate it, or manage it, or perform it. Whatever showed up, and I practiced the simple act of being okay with it, not liking it necessarily, not wanting it to stay, just okay with it being here right now. And over time, that okayness expanded into my entire life. Difficult emotions still arose. They never stopped arising, but they no longer destabilized me. I knew how to be with them. I'd practiced it every morning for years. So when life brought grief or fear or anger or confusion, I didn't collapse. I didn't fragment. I just sat with it, the way I'd learned to sit with my muddy water, observing it, allowing it, trusting it would settle when it settled. This is the peace I'm offering you. Not a life without difficult emotions. That's impossible, and honestly, it would be a diminished life. Emotions are information. They're how you interface with reality. They're valuable and necessary and completely human. But a life where you're not terrorized by your emotions, where you can feel them fully without being consumed by them, where your okayness doesn't depend on feeling okay, that's real peace. And it's available to you every single morning when you practice being with what is, instead of fighting for what you think should be. The third lesson builds on the first two but takes them in a direction that might surprise you. The morning sets your frequency, not your content. Most people use their mornings to plan their day. They wake up and immediately start thinking about what they need to do, who they need to see, what they need to accomplish. They make lists. They set intentions. They visualize outcomes. They're trying to control the content of their day, the specific events, tasks, and interactions that will fill their hours. And there's nothing wrong with planning. Planning is useful. But it's not the most important thing you can do with your morning, because the content of your day, what actually happens, is largely out of your control. People cancel meetings. Unexpected problems arise. Opportunities appear that weren't on your calendar. Your carefully planned day gets disrupted constantly by the simple fact of living in a world with other people and unpredictable circumstances. What you can control, what you can set every single morning, is your frequency. Not what you'll do, but who you'll be underneath all the doing. Think of it like tuning a musical instrument. When you tune a guitar, you're not deciding what song you're going to play. You're setting the strings to their proper pitch, so that whatever song you play will sound true. If the guitar is out of tune, even the most beautiful composition will sound wrong. But if it's properly tuned, any song, even a simple one, will have a quality of rightness to it. Your morning practice is tuning yourself to your proper pitch. You're not planning what you're going to do. You're setting the quality of presence you're going to bring to whatever you do. You're establishing the internal state from which all your actions will flow. And what is that internal state? What frequency are you tuning to? For me, it's honesty, presence, okayness with not okayness. The willingness to see what's actually true in this moment instead of what I wish were true. The capacity to be with difficulty without collapsing. The practice of meeting reality as it is instead of as I think it should be. When I start my day tuned to that frequency, everything that follows has a different quality. Not better or worse necessarily, but true, aligned, real. I'm not performing my way through the day. I'm present for it. So when something unexpected happens, a crisis, a disappointment, an opportunity, I respond from that tuned state. I don't react from panic or grasping or fear. I stay present to what's actually happening, honest about what I'm feeling, okay with not immediately knowing the solution. And from that space I can respond skillfully. Not perfectly, there's no such thing as perfect, but skillfully, appropriately, wisely. Contrast that with someone who starts their day in performance mode. They wake up already trying to optimize, already pushing themselves, already in striving energy. They skip the tuning and go straight to playing. And what happens? Everything feels effortful. Even successes feel hollow because they were achieved from a frequency of not enough. Even accomplishments don't satisfy because they were driven by inadequacy rather than genuine desire. The frequency you set in the morning colors everything that follows. If you start your day fighting with yourself, trying to force yourself to be more productive, more disciplined, more whatever, you'll fight with your day. If you start your day performing who you think you should be, you'll perform all day long and end it exhausted from the constant pretending. But if you start your day simply being with yourself, honestly, presently, accepting whatever state you're in, you'll move through your day from wholeness instead of lack, from presence instead of performance, from truth instead of should. And here's what's fascinating. When you set the right frequency, you often accomplish more than when you were trying to control the content. Not because you're working harder, but because your energy isn't being drained by internal resistance. You're not fighting yourself. You're not managing an image. You're not performing. All that energy is available for actually living your life. Plus, you make better decisions. When you're tuned to honesty, you can tell when something is truly aligned with your values versus when you're just trying to look good or avoid criticism. When you're tuned to presence, you notice opportunities that your planning mind would have overlooked. When you're tuned to okayness with not okayness, you can take appropriate risks because failure isn't catastrophic, it's just information. The morning practice sets this frequency. You're not planning your tasks, you're tuning your being, you're establishing the ground you'll stand on, regardless of what the day brings. And this is why it matters so much what you do in those first moments after waking, because that's when you choose your frequency for the day. If the first thing you do is grab your phone and start consuming information, you're setting a frequency of reactivity. You're telling your system that other people's agendas are more important than your own groundedness. If the first thing you do is jump into your to-do list, you're setting a frequency of striving. You're starting from a place of not enough that will color every action you take. But if the first thing you do is simply arrive in yourself, check in with what's actually present, name it honestly, sit with it without trying to change it, you're setting a frequency of truth, of presence, of self-connection, and everything that follows will flow from that frequency. This doesn't mean your day will be perfect. It doesn't mean nothing will go wrong or challenge you. But it means you'll meet whatever comes from a tuned state, from your proper pitch. And that makes all the difference in the world. Now, here's the fourth and final core truth, and it's the most paradoxical one. You gain authority by relinquishing the need for it. This is going to sound backwards until you really sit with it. So stay with me. Most people are desperately seeking authority. They want to feel in control of their lives. They want to have power over their circumstances. They want to be respected, influential, capable of determining outcomes. And so they try to achieve authority through force, through discipline and will and constant effort. They try to control themselves, control their emotions, control their thoughts, control other people's perceptions of them. They build their entire life around maintaining this sense of being in control. And what happens? The harder they try to maintain control, the more out of control they feel. Because their peace now depends on everything going according to plan. Their sense of okay depends on circumstances cooperating with their preferences. Their authority is conditional. It only exists as long as nothing threatens it. This is fragile authority. The authority of someone who's barely holding it together and knows it. The authority that has to be constantly defended and reinforced and proven. The authority that collapses the moment real pressure arrives. But there's another kind of authority. The authority that comes from being completely okay with not being in control. From sitting with your powerlessness without collapsing. From acknowledging that most of life is actually out of your hands and being at peace with that reality. This sounds like weakness. It sounds like giving up. But it's actually the strongest position you can take. Because when your okayness doesn't depend on being in control, you can't be controlled by circumstances. When you're genuinely at peace with powerlessness, you have a power that external events can't touch. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine two leaders facing a crisis. Both have lost control of the situation. Things are not going according to plan. Chaos is unfolding and there's nothing they can do to stop it. The first leader, the one whose authority depends on control, starts to panic internally. They can't let anyone see the panic, so they double down on appearing in control. They make forceful decisions even when they don't have enough information. They blame others. They get defensive. They tighten their grip on whatever small things they can still control, and everyone around them can feel it. The desperation, the fear, the fragility beneath the forceful exterior. The second leader, the one who's practiced being with powerlessness, remains steady. Not because they have a plan or know what to do, but because they're not panicking about not knowing. They can say, I don't have all the answers right now. This situation is beyond my control. But here's what we do know. Here's what we can influence. Here's how we're going to respond to what we can't control. And everyone around them relaxes slightly, because this person isn't pretending. They're not performing certainty they don't feel. They're just honestly present to the reality of the situation. Which leader actually has more authority in that moment? The one desperately trying to maintain the appearance of control, or the one who's comfortable acknowledging the lack of control? The second one. Every time. Because real authority isn't about control, it's about presence. It's about being so grounded in your own okayness that external chaos can't knock you off center. And you can only develop that groundedness by practicing being with lack of control. By sitting every morning with the parts of yourself you can't control. The thoughts that arise without your permission. The emotions that show up uninvited. The muddy water that won't settle according to your timeline. The anxiety that doesn't respond to your breathing exercises. The doubt that persists despite your affirmations. When you practice being okay with all of that, when you release your need to control your internal experience, something miraculous happens. You stop being controlled by your internal experience. The anxiety can be there, and you can still function. The doubt can visit, and you can still take action. The confusion can persist, and you can still make decisions. This is true authority, not the authority of nothing difficult ever happens to me, but the authority of difficult things happen, and I know how to be with them. Not the authority of I always know what to do, but the authority of I can sit with not knowing without falling apart. I've watched emperors crumble when their kingdoms were threatened. All their power, all their wealth, all their control, none of it mattered when the thing they'd built their identity on started to shake. They didn't know how to be without that external structure. They'd never practiced being with powerlessness. So when it arrived, it destroyed them. But I've watched peasants remain completely centered through devastating loss. The loss of their homes, their livelihoods, their loved ones, things that should have shattered them. And they didn't shatter. Not because they didn't feel the pain, they did, fully. But because their okayness wasn't dependent on having those things. They knew how to be with loss. They'd practiced it in small ways every day. They'd sat with disappointment and grief and helplessness so many times that it wasn't foreign territory anymore. That's the practice. Every morning, when you sit with your muddy water, when you allow whatever emotions are present without trying to control them, when you witness your thoughts without needing to manage them, you're practicing being okay with lack of control. You're building familiarity with powerlessness. You're learning that you can be well even when things aren't going well. And over time, that practice builds an authority that circumstances can't shake, because it's not based on circumstances. It's based on your capacity to be with whatever circumstances bring. This is why the morning practice is so powerful. It's not about achieving control. It's about practicing the release of control in a safe space, so that when life demands you release control in a high-stakes space, you know how to do it. You've done it 1,000 times already. The paradox resolves like this. You gain power by befriending powerlessness. You gain authority by releasing the need to control. You find peace by accepting that some mornings, many mornings, there is no peace. And that's okay too. That's the transformation from authority based on control to authority based on presence, from peace based on circumstances to peace based on your relationship with circumstances, from power that comes from forcing outcomes to power that comes from being okay with outcomes you didn't choose. And all of it starts in the morning. with the simple practice of meeting yourself honestly before the world asks you to be someone else. So now let me get practical. Let me tell you exactly how to do this practice. Because everything I've shared so far is useless if you don't know how to actually apply it. This isn't about adding complexity to your life. It's not another elaborate routine you have to force yourself through. It's actually about subtracting the performance you wake up into every morning, stripping away the should and the trying and the forcing, and just being present to what actually is. The practice has 3 movements, 3 simple acts that together create the space for honesty, familiarity, and authority to develop. And I want to walk you through each one carefully so you understand not just what to do, but why you're doing it and what you're developing through the doing. The first movement I call the 5-minute arrival, and it happens before anything else, before you check your phone, before you start planning your day, before you make coffee or shower, or do anything that moves you into doing mode. This is the practice of simply arriving into your body and this moment. Here's how it works. When you first wake up, before you get out of bed or before you've been up for more than a few minutes, find somewhere you won't be disturbed. It can be sitting on the edge of your bed. It can be a chair by a window. It can be on the floor with your back against the wall. The location doesn't matter. What matters is that you're sitting upright, not lying down because that invites sleep, and you're somewhere you can just be for 5 minutes without interruption. And then you ask yourself one question, just one. What am I actually feeling right now? Not what you should be feeling, not what you want to be feeling, not what makes sense to be feeling. What are you actually feeling right now, in this moment, in your body? And here's the crucial part. You name it, out loud if possible, but at least internally with words. Not vague words like fine or okay, real words that describe actual felt experience: tired, anxious, resistant, numb, excited, heavy, restless, sad, peaceful, irritated. Whatever's actually there. You might need to sit for a moment before you can name it. That's okay. You're learning to tune into something you've been trained to ignore. Your actual feeling state beneath all the should and the story. So it might take practice to identify what's actually present versus what you think should be present. But keep asking, keep tuning in. What am I actually feeling? And when something surfaces, even if it's just, I don't know what I'm feeling, I feel kind of blank, name that. I feel blank. I feel disconnected from my feelings. I feel numb. The practice is building honesty muscle. You're training yourself to tell the truth about your internal experience. And this might sound simple, but it's revolutionary. Because most people start their day lying to themselves. They feel anxious but tell themselves they're fine. They feel exhausted but force themselves to be energetic. They feel resistant to the day ahead but override that resistance with discipline. And every time you lie to yourself about what you're feeling, you fragment. You create a split between reality and your story about reality. And that split costs energy, massive amounts of energy. But when you start your day with honesty, with simply naming what's actually true, you start from integration. All of you is present. The tired part and the part that has to show up anyway. The anxious part and the part that's going to face the challenge. The resistant part and the part that's committed to your work. They're all acknowledged, all given space, all real. And from that integrated place, you can actually make choices. Not forced choices where you override yourself, but conscious choices where you acknowledge what's present and choose how to work with it. I'm feeling really resistant to this day. Okay, that's true. That's here. I'm going to acknowledge that resistance and still show up, not by forcing it away, but by making space for it to exist alongside my commitment. That's so different from, I shouldn't feel resistant. What's wrong with me? I need to just push through this. The first approach keeps you integrated. The second fragments you before your day even begins. So that's the first movement. 5 minutes of simply arriving into your body and naming what's actually present. No fixing, no judging, no changing. Just honest recognition of what is. The second movement is the muddy water witness. This is the heart of the practice, and it's where you spend most of your morning time. 10 to 15 minutes, or longer if you have it and feel called to it. You're going to sit with your messy mind exactly the way I described with the muddy water metaphor. You're going to watch thoughts arise without grabbing them. Notice worries without immediately solving them. Let emotions move through without needing to understand why they're there or make them go away. But here's what you're not doing. You're not trying to achieve stillness. You're not trying to clear your mind. You're not trying to reach some special meditative state. You're not trying to do this right. You're simply befriending the mess, witnessing it, being with it. Like you're sitting next to a jar of muddy water and just watching what it does when you leave it alone. So practically, what does this look like? You're sitting there. Eyes can be open or closed, whatever feels natural. And you're just noticing what's happening in your awareness. A thought about your meeting later arises. You notice it. There's a thought about the meeting. And instead of grabbing it and planning what you'll say, instead of following it down the rabbit hole of anxiety about the meeting, you just let it be there, like a cloud passing through the sky of your awareness. Another thought arises, a worry about money. You notice it. There's worry about money. And instead of trying to solve the money problem right now, instead of spiraling into all the what-ifs, you just acknowledge its presence and let it float. An emotion surfaces. Sadness maybe, or frustration, or loneliness. You feel it in your body. Notice where it lives. There's sadness in my chest. There's tightness in my throat. And instead of immediately asking why or trying to make it go away or distracting yourself from it, you just let it be there. Let it exist. This is the practice. This witnessing without interfering. This allowing without needing to fix or change or understand. And here's what's important to understand. You're not going to do this perfectly. Your mind is going to grab thoughts. You're going to find yourself 5 minutes into planning your day, or replaying yesterday's conversation, or solving tomorrow's problems. That's not failure. That's just what minds do. When you notice you've been grabbed by a thought, and you will notice because the practice of noticing is what you're developing, you just gently come back. No judgment. No, I'm bad at this. Just, oh, I got caught in that thought. Now I'm back to witnessing. Think of it like training a puppy. The puppy wanders off. You gently call it back. It wanders again. You call it back again. You don't yell at the puppy for being a puppy. You just patiently, kindly, persistently call it back to where you want it to be. Your attention is the puppy. It's going to wander. That's its nature. The practice is the gentle calling back, over and over, not with force, but with patience, with kindness toward yourself. And some mornings the water will start to settle. You'll feel the thoughts slowing down, the emotions softening, a spaciousness opening up, a clarity emerging. And that's nice. That's pleasant. But it's not the goal. Other mornings, many mornings, the water will stay completely muddy. The thoughts will keep churning. The emotions will stay intense. Nothing will settle no matter how long you sit there. And that's okay too. That's not failure. That's just information. You're carrying a lot today. Your system is processing something. There's sediment that needs time to work through. The practice isn't about achieving clear water. It's about being willing to see the mud, to sit with it, to not panic about it, to trust that it's doing what it needs to do, even if that process is invisible to you. And here's the subtle but crucial shift. If you notice yourself trying to do it right, if you catch yourself evaluating whether you're succeeding at this practice, if you find yourself thinking, am I getting it yet? Is my mind quiet enough? Am I doing this correctly? That's just another thought to witness. Even the desire for peace, even the goal orientation, even the self-judgment, it's all just more sediment in the jar. Notice it. Let it be there. Don't make it mean anything about you. The entire practice is learning to be with what is, instead of forcing what should be. And that learning happens through repetition, through showing up every morning and practicing the simple act of witnessing without interfering. Over time, weeks, months, years, you'll develop this capacity to be with your internal experience without being controlled by it. You'll recognize your patterns. You'll see when you're catastrophizing. You'll catch yourself getting hooked by old stories. You'll notice the difference between thoughts that are pointing to something real and thoughts that are just old programming running. And all of that recognition gives you freedom. Not freedom from having difficult thoughts and emotions. Those are part of being human. But freedom from being unconsciously driven by them. That's what the muddy water witness creates. Internal familiarity, self-knowledge, the authority that comes from being so honest with yourself that nothing can surprise you anymore. The third movement is brief but important. I call it the frequency set. It takes just 2 or 3 minutes at the end of your sitting practice before you stand up and enter your day. And what you're doing here is consciously choosing your frequency for the day. Not what you're going to do. You might have that planned already. Or the day might unfold in completely unexpected ways. But who you're going to be underneath everything you do. So you ask yourself, who do I want to be today, beneath all the doing? Not what you want to achieve. Not what goals you want to accomplish. Not what you want other people to think of you. Who you want to be. What quality of presence you want to bring to your day. For me, it's usually honesty, or presence, or willingness to not know. But your word might be different. It might be kindness, or curiosity, or courage, or openness. Whatever quality feels true and aligned for you in this moment, choose one word, one quality, and let it settle into you. Not as a performance goal. You're not trying to prove that you're honest or present or kind. It's more like a tuning fork, a frequency you're setting that you can return to when you get lost in your day. And you will get lost. You'll get caught up in reactivity or performance or stress or all the usual patterns. That's guaranteed. But when you notice you've drifted, when you catch yourself forcing or pretending or fighting, you can come back to your frequency. Oh, I said honesty this morning. Am I being honest right now? Or am I managing an image? That question alone can shift everything. It can bring you back to yourself, back to presence, back to the tuning you set in the morning. So you choose your word. You let it resonate in your body, and then you carry it with you like a talisman. Not something you have to achieve, but something you can return to. A home base for your being. That's the practice. 3 movements. 5 minutes of arriving and naming what's true. 10 to 15 minutes of witnessing your muddy water without interference. 2 to 3 minutes of setting your frequency for the day. 20 to 25 minutes total. That's all. But those 20 minutes, done consistently, will transform your relationship with yourself and therefore your entire life. Now, I want to talk about how this practice extends into your actual day. Because the morning practice isn't separate from your life. It's preparation for your life. It's where you build the muscle that you'll use in every moment. Throughout your day, you're going to get pulled into performance, into reaction, into old patterns. You're going to find yourself forcing or pretending or managing or controlling. That's normal. That's being human in a world that constantly demands things from you. But now you have a practice. Now you have a tool. And the tool is simple. Pause. Take 3 breaths. And ask yourself the same question you asked in the morning. Am I being honest right now? Or am I managing an image? That question, that one question, is your entire practice in portable form. It brings you back to the frequency you set in the morning, back to truth instead of performance, back to presence instead of pretending. You don't need to do anything elaborate. You don't need to sit down and meditate in the middle of your workday. You just need to pause, breathe, ask the question, and let the answer inform your next choice. Am I being honest right now? And maybe the answer is no. Maybe you're performing confidence you don't feel. Maybe you're hiding your confusion. Maybe you're pretending to agree when you actually disagree. And just noticing that, just seeing the performance, that's enough to shift it. You can choose to stay in the performance if that feels necessary in the moment. But now it's a conscious choice rather than an unconscious pattern. Or maybe the answer is yes. You are being honest. You are present. You are aligned. And that recognition reinforces the practice. It helps you learn what honesty feels like in your body, so you can recognize it more quickly next time. This is how the morning practice weaves into your entire life. You're not trying to be perfect all day. You're not trying to maintain some constant state of presence or honesty or clarity. You're just checking in periodically, pausing, breathing, asking the question, returning to your tuning when you notice you've drifted. And over time, the pauses get more frequent. The recognition gets quicker. The gap between when you drift and when you notice you've drifted, that gap gets shorter. You catch yourself earlier. You return to yourself faster. You spend more of your day actually present to your life instead of lost in performance or reaction. This is the transformation. Not dramatic, not overnight, but steady, cumulative, real. And here's what makes this practice different from every other morning routine you've tried or heard about. It's not about self-improvement. It's not about becoming a better version of yourself. It's not about optimization or achievement or discipline. It's about becoming a real person, an honest person, a present person. And real people have natural authority because they're not hiding anything. They're not pretending. They're not managing an image. They're just there, fully, honestly. And that creates a solidity that people can sense, even if they can't name it. You'll notice this in your relationships first. People will tell you that you seem different, more grounded, more trustworthy, easier to be around. And it's not because you're trying to be those things. It's because you've stopped trying to be anything other than what you are. You've stopped performing. And when you stop performing, people relax around you because they're not being asked to witness your performance. They're not being recruited into your image management. They can just be with you. Real person to real person. You'll notice it in your work. You'll make better decisions, not because you're smarter or more capable, but because you're more honest about what you actually think and want and value. You're not choosing based on what looks good or what you think you should want. You're choosing based on what actually aligns with who you are. You'll notice it in your stress levels. Not that stressful things stop happening. They don't. but that stress doesn't destabilize you the way it used to, because you've practiced sitting with uncomfortable states every morning. Stress is just another uncomfortable state. You know how to be with it without collapsing. You'll notice it in your confidence. Not confidence in the sense of knowing you'll succeed or never making mistakes, but confidence in the sense of trusting yourself, trusting that you can handle whatever comes, trusting that even if you don't know what to do, you know how to be with not knowing. This is what the practice creates. Not a perfect life, not a life without difficulty or doubt or confusion, but a life where you're present for your life, where you know yourself, where you trust yourself, where your authority comes from familiarity instead of control. And it all starts with 20 minutes every morning. 20 minutes of meeting yourself honestly before the world asks you to be someone else. So let me bring this to a close. Let me tie together everything we've explored and send you off with what you need to actually live this. We started with a warning about what happens if you don't change your mornings. 20 years from now, successful but stranger to yourself, respected everywhere except in the mirror. Authority over others, but no authority over your own mind. That future is real. I've watched it happen to too many people. But I've also watched another future. The future where someone commits to meeting themselves honestly every morning, where they build familiarity with their internal landscape, where they develop the capacity to be with whatever arises without collapsing, where they stop performing and start being real. And that future is available to you, starting tomorrow morning, starting with 20 minutes of honest recognition. We talked about how you've been lied to, how you were taught that authority comes from confidence and control and certainty, how you were taught to treat yourself as a project, as something that needs to be improved and optimized and fixed, how you were taught that peace is a specific emotional state you need to achieve. And we uncovered the truth beneath those lies. That authority comes from familiarity, not control. That peace is a relationship with all feelings, not the absence of difficult ones. That your morning sets a frequency, not a content plan. That you gain power by befriending powerlessness. We explored the muddy water, how your mind settles when you stop disturbing it, how clarity emerges from stillness, not from effort, how the practice isn't about achieving peace, but about being willing to see the chaos. And we walked through the actual practice, 3 movements, arriving and naming what's true, witnessing your muddy water without interfering, setting your frequency for the day, simple, not easy, but simple, 20 minutes. That's what I'm asking you to commit to. 20 minutes every morning before you check your phone, before you start doing, before you enter performance mode. 20 minutes of just being with yourself honestly, and I know what you're thinking. I don't have 20 minutes. My mornings are already packed. I barely have time to get out the door as it is. But here's the truth. You don't have time not to do this. Because without this practice, you're spending your entire day fragmented, fighting with yourself, managing images, performing instead of being present. And that fragmentation costs you hours. Hours of energy drained by internal resistance. Hours of effectiveness lost to stress and reactivity. Hours of your life lived at half presence because you never actually arrived in yourself. 20 minutes in the morning gives you back your whole day because you're integrated, present, tuned. You're not fighting yourself anymore. All that energy is available for actually living. So yes, it costs 20 minutes, but it saves you hours. It might literally save your life, not in a dramatic sense, but in the sense of making sure you're actually present for the life you're living instead of performing your way through it unconsciously. And here's what I need you to understand. This practice won't make you perfect. You're still going to have difficult days, still going to feel anxious and doubtful and confused and overwhelmed, still going to make mistakes and face challenges and struggle sometimes. But you'll be present for all of it. You'll know yourself through it. You'll have authority over your relationship with it, even when you don't have authority over the circumstances themselves. You won't be a stranger to yourself anymore. You won't feel like you're watching your life happen from a distance. You won't wonder who you became while you were busy achieving things. You'll be here, actually here, in your life, as yourself. And that presence, that realness, that integration, that's everything. That's what makes life worth living. Not the achievements or the accomplishments or the external markers of success, but the simple, profound experience of being present for your own life. So let me leave you with this. This is the truth I need you to take with you. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're not failing at peace. You've just been taught to perform yourself instead of know yourself. And performance always feels fragile because it's not real. The stillness you're seeking isn't somewhere you arrive. It's what's left when you stop pretending to be who you think you should be. Your chaos isn't a problem. Your dishonesty about the chaos is the problem. And the moment you start telling the truth to yourself each morning, naming what's real, sitting with what's messy, choosing who you are underneath what you do, you become unmovable. Not because you've conquered yourself, because you've finally stopped fighting yourself. That's authority. That's peace. That's freedom. And it's waiting for you every morning, not with demands, not with tests you need to pass or states you need to achieve, just with an invitation to be honest, to be present, to be real. The morning is waiting for you. Are you ready to meet it? Are you ready to meet yourself? That's where everything changes. Now, if what I've shared resonates with you, if something in this conversation touched something true in you, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, if you felt that little shift that happens when someone names something you've always known but couldn't articulate, I would be grateful if you'd like this video. Not for the algorithm, though that helps, but because your like tells me that this perspective matters, that this way of thinking about authority and peace and presence, it's not just my private experience. It's something real that others are seeking too. And that encourages me to keep sharing what I've learned. And if you found yourself disagreeing with something I said, or questioning it or feeling uncomfortable, that's valuable too. Leave a comment. Tell me where you disagree. Tell me what doesn't sit right. Tell me what your experience has been. Because real wisdom doesn't emerge from everyone agreeing with each other. It emerges from dialogue, from honest exchange, from people willing to share their truth even when it contradicts someone else's truth. I want to know what you're wrestling with. I want to know what questions this raised for you. I want to know what you're going to try and what you're skeptical about. The comment section isn't just a place for praise or criticism. It's a place for real conversation, for the kind of exchange that happens when people are honest with each other instead of performing for each other. And if you want more of these conversations, not daily productivity hacks or motivational speeches or quick fixes, but deeper explorations into what it means to be human, to be whole, to stop performing and start being, then subscribe. Because this is what I do. This is what I care about. Having real conversations about real things, about the internal work that nobody sees but that determines everything, about the morning practices that don't look impressive but that transform lives, about the paradoxes and contradictions and uncomfortable truths that we usually avoid in favor of simpler, more palatable messages. I'm not here to make you feel good. I'm here to help you be real. And those are very different things. So subscribe if that interests you. If you want to keep exploring this territory together, if you're willing to question your assumptions and sit with discomfort and do the actual work instead of just consuming content about the work, the morning is waiting for you, not tomorrow. Tomorrow is just another form of avoiding today. The morning is waiting for you right now. When you wake up tomorrow, before you do anything else, before you check your phone or start your day or slip into performance mode, just sit. Just arrive. Just name what's true. 20 minutes. That's all. And see what shifts. See what settles. See what becomes possible when you finally stop fighting yourself and start knowing yourself. That's where everything changes. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being willing to question and explore and do this work. I'll see you in the next one.